Hello and welcome to the 905er podcast. I'm Roland Tanner.
I am Joel McLeod.
It's far from the first time, and it certainly won't be the last time. Once again, we're looking today at the Ford government's attack on environmental protections and how it's handing power and financial windfalls to a small number of major developers, who just happen also to be major PC party donors. Last week, Environmental Defence and Democracy Watch formally called for a police investigation into the circumstances surrounding apparent insider information leaks to developers ahead of the announcement of lands being removed from the Greenbelt. Joining us to discuss the nature of the evidence and the implications for both the environment and our democracy if these allegations prove to be true is Tim Gray of Environmental Defence. Tim has over 25 years of experience developing and implementing environmental policy change efforts and has worked with multiple governments across the political spectrum in pursuit of better environmental protections, working both with government and alongside other activists on the front lines of the battles to combat climate change and to defend the environment. Well, hello and welcome Tim Gray from Environmental Defence to the 905er podcast. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Well, as our listeners are already very well aware of what's been going on with the province lately, with their announcements of change, as they would spin it, changes or relocations of the Greenbelt, as others would say, basically handing chunks of the Greenbelt over to developers, and Environmental Defence and Democracy Watch have kind of collectively come together to sort of challenge the background to what's happening here. So perhaps you could just sort of kick us off by explaining what exactly is that you're trying to do at the moment with regard to the Greenbelt changes.
Yeah, so most folks will realize the Greenbelt is 2 million acres of farmland, forest, wetlands. It kind of wraps around the Greater Golden Horseshoe from Niagara over to Northumberland and then extends north along the spine of the Niagara Escarpment all the way up to Tobermory. So it's our environmental anchor in Southern Ontario. It has grown and evolved over time since the mid-1980s when it was first, early parts of it were first established by Bill Davis. So this is like a multi-generational, multi-government initiative. And it's meant to be permanently protected. So not to be, saved for a little while and then developed later. And it is joined by something called the Growth Plan, which is aimed to have housing be developed inside of existing cities. Greater density creates greater opportunities for transit, greater opportunities for biking, walkability, reduces carbon emissions, higher quality of life, all those great things, right, that you get from building inside of your cities and investing there. So what we're seeing the current government do is basically race backwards to about 1950, before the establishment of conservation authorities, before any of these land use plans, before any recognition that car-based sprawl is both an economic and environmental nightmare for Southern Ontario. So they've gone in and attacked all of the planning rules, which result in this greater intensification, mandated cities to sprawl onto surrounding farmland, and then as well have gone right into the Greenbelt itself. And as you were mentioning, decided to give big chunks of it to sprawl developers. And of course, that is probably their most high-profile violation of a public commitment. They'd promised repeatedly up and down that they would never touch the Greenbelt, and now they very much more than touched it. More like grabbed it and thrown it to the ground and decided to give it away to a bunch of very well-connected developers. So that's kind of the situation that we're in right now. And in particular, there's something that smells not great about the fact that a number of these properties in the Greenbelt were purchased since the government came to power. And of course, land that is permanently zoned as farmland has much lower market value than land that could be turned into a subdivision. So if you're able to buy it when it's zoned for agriculture, especially when it's zoned to be permanently zoned for agriculture. And then you're successful at getting that converted into a zoning that would allow for housing development. The amount of money that you can make is just phenomenal. I mean, we're talking like being able to turn tens of millions of dollars for a large property into hundreds of millions or billions of dollars. So there's some real money to be made here. And there was no public process around identification of these lands, no signaling that this was coming. In fact, all the signals were to the contrary, that land wouldn't be touched. And then suddenly, 15 properties are announced that are being considered for removal from the Greenbelt. Very short public consultation period, and then immediately after closing of the consultation period, a move to remove them from the Greenbelt. So, the questions that come to mind are like, did these developers know that these lands were going to be removed? If they did know, how is that possible? Did someone in government tell them? Were there conversations? Was that the premier? Was that the Minister of Municipal Affairs and Housing? Was that somebody in the civil service? Or is it just luck that people went out and took large loans to buy land that couldn't be developed on, and with the hope that someday legislation that everyone promised would never change would suddenly change? It smells really, really bad. So as a result, we have made a request to the Ontario Provincial Police to look into this issue and to determine whether or not they would see evidence here of violations under the criminal code, criminal breach of trust by a public official, because of what we see and playing out in front of our eyes.
So two things on that. So I mean, clearly you something doesn't smell right here to you. That. And I think a lot of people are thinking the same thing, is that, it's kind of a chicken and egg problem. How did these businesses strike it so good within a few months of this plan being announced? That's they should be buying lottery tickets if they have that kind of luck. So you're required, I think people are understand that it's kind of reasonable to say, well, we need to investigate this. Something happened here. What happened? What has been the response from the OPP to your request? Have you heard back that they are opening an investigation? Are they looking into it? What's been the response from the OPP?
Yeah, I haven't heard from them yet. I did hear, though, just in the last couple of days that there's a University of Toronto criminal law and constitutional law professor who made a complaint as well, broadly parallel to the one that we put in. And he was interviewed, I think it was on Friday, by the OPP. So I think they're just, going through stuff that they've heard from people that is, has detailed concerns articulated probably in a sequential manner, but I haven't heard from them yet.
Are you concerned that some kind of fraud happened here, that or some, maybe fraud is too strong of a word, but that there was, insider trading, that somebody, basically your concern is that the government told these developers, this is what we're going, or the developer said, we want to buy this land, open this up for development, and that this this kind of stereotypical backroom dealing took place here.
Yeah, I mean, public officials are required to act in the public interest, whether you're an elected official or whether you work for the provincial government. And, this was not done, as far as we can tell, in a way that provided equal opportunity for anybody who owned land in the Greenbelt to take advantage of the possibility of it being rezoned. So there's that aspect of it too. And then for the largest portion of the land removed from the Greenbelt, this is the Duffins Rouge Agricultural Preserve, just on the boundary of Rouge National Park. And it makes up about 70% of all of the land removed. So it's about 5,000 acres. It was protected not just in the Greenbelt, but also by its own legislation, which was revoked in Bill 39 last week. So that legislation had easements on that forced it to be agriculture forever, legislatively protected, pretty much the highest level of protection you can get, except maybe having it in a national park or something. So and those lands were originally expropriated from farmers back in the early 1970s for the Pickering Airport, if you remember, which never went ahead. And some of those lands ended up in the national park. Some of them are still owned by the federal government in the province. But that 5,000 acre area was deemed to be not likely to be used or not going to be used. So it was returned to farmers, but the province wanted it to stay as farmland. So they legislated easements onto the title. So by removing those, and then subsequently to that, some of the farmers, or most of the farmers, were bought out by by a number of developers, one in particular. But by removing the easement, that land, which was purchased at very low prices as permanent agricultural land, again, has now massive value because now it's going to be developable. And all of that value belonged to the province. That land was sold by the people of Ontario to farmers for farming, and now it's going to be flipped to development. Like, if we really in this province want to build affordable housing, I mean, wouldn't it have made more sense if we absolutely have to develop that land for housing, which there's no evidence is true, by the way. But anyway, if we wanted to, if the province decided that we wanted affordable housing, why would you not just expropriate that from the developer at agricultural land values? It would have cost you nothing compared to what it is once it has development rights on it, and built affordable housing on it ourselves. We could have put thousands of homes that were affordable on that land. Probably a bad idea from where it is, but we could have done that. But if we really wanted to have affordable housing, we wanted to put it there, although there's no reason we would put housing there because we should be building them other places and we have lots of land other places. But just from a public interest perspective, if you actually wanted affordable housing to be built and not market housing, which is going to be $2 million per house way out in the middle of nowhere, you would have expropriated those lands back from the developer at agricultural land prices. And then you could have built housing there that was truly affordable. So there's a real loss of public value here by removing those easements and turning that land into something that now has massive, massive value for the developers that own it.
You're kind of touching upon a theme that we're seeing here, is that the urgency we're hearing from the province that we need to build housing to meet the demand that's coming our way, which is true, undeniable. We need housing in this province. But the question that everybody has is like, why this plot of land? Why is this land the one that needs to be carved up to meet that housing demand? And I think you touched upon an interesting point, is that if this was about meeting the housing demand, there are more cost-effective ways to do that, right? Rather than just hand it over to developers to say, okay, have at it, build us housing. Like you said, by purchasing this land at a more reasonable rate, and then building affordable housing on it that is more tenable to the people who actually do need the housing, would kind of make a more logical way to go. Because the other thing is, there's no criteria that once they own the land that these developers have to build on it like next year. We're assuming that they buy the land and we're going to start seeing construction next year. Not necessarily. They might sit on it until it's even more valuable. 2, 3, 4 years down the road. Can you maybe just touch upon that, like kind of the logic of this whole enterprise of carving up the Greenbelt for development, when there's no sign to me that we're going to get houses there next year anyways?
Yeah, I mean, the assertion that the province is making when they opened up the Greenbelt, and with all of these other changes that they've done, attacking wetlands, shutting down the ability of conservation authorities to protect areas across the province, et cetera, is all of this environmental protection, or all this democracy that exists at a local level, is in the way of building houses quickly. The ironic thing in all of this, of course, is that there's no data to substantiate that we have a land scarcity problem that would drive anyone to open up the Greenbelt. We have an area inside of urban boundaries. So, within the city boundaries, town boundaries of the area of the cities and towns within the GTA, the size of the city of Vancouver that is allocated for development is not built on. Also, everyone who's looked at this issue from a housing supply perspective has concluded the Greenbelt is not needed, including the province's own housing task force. They were very explicit in saying you don't need to go into the Greenbelt to meet the housing supply needs. And in fact, what they recommended is that we make changes to the planning rules that exist within our cities and towns to allow for more housing to be built within the existing urban boundaries. So, and to do that in a way where you would have more variety of housing types. For example, I live in downtown Toronto. I live in a neighborhood that was built out between the late 1890s and kind of 1920. We used to build beautiful 10, 12 unit apartment buildings. They're on my street, but we haven't built any since about 1930. Because the planning rules just do not allow multi-unit buildings to go into my neighborhood. Similarly, I'm about 150 meters from College Street, and most of the stores along College Street in my neighborhood are 2 stories or maybe 3. There's no reason that those couldn't be 6-story apartments, storefronts in the bottom, restaurants in the bottom like they are now, but 4 floors of apartments above that. So there's all of these rules in places like Toronto and Hamilton that really block more housing from being built in the city. And if you build it in my neighborhood, you have access to a subway within a 10-minute walk. You have a 2-minute walk away from a streetcar. You're a 3-minute walk away from a supermarket. There's no need to even have a car if you live in these kind of neighborhoods. But instead of enabling that, when they've passed all this recent legislation, mandating places like Toronto, Hamilton, and other cities to allow this kind of development, they've instead lowered the density requirements for new development. So we have to put in fewer people per hectare when a new development goes ahead than we did before. We took apart the Hamilton and Halton plans, which had 0 sprawl outside of their boundaries, and forced them to sprawl onto farmland. And you open the Greenbelt to development. Now, the Greenbelt is outside of the cities by definition. So this means far away, no infrastructure, no sewer, no water. New highways need to be built there. And everyone who lives there, if houses do get built there, will be car dependent. There will be no transit, and they'll be in the middle of nowhere. So these houses, as you can imagine, are very likely to be single family homes, very expensive, not affordable.
So in light of all that information that you just gave to us and our listeners, what do you think is fueling this push onto the Greenbelt?
I think that all of this is, it's one big package, and we're seeing this in multiple areas, but in the housing area, in particular, it's like the fantasy outcome for the lobbyists for the Ontario Home Builders Association and Build. Like these guys, I know all these people. They're always lobbying for their own self-interest. They're industry associations, but most of the time they don't ever actually expect to get what they're asking for, because most governments think, well, that's what you want and you have your view, but we're here to represent the public interest, and we have to balance your demands with what society needs. And in this case, with this government, they just don't care about the public interest. It's whatever the loudest industry developer and industry association wants, they get. And just to underscore that, I think you may have seen some of the comments in the media last week from Build, and they're concerned about how badly the powers of the conservation authorities have been eroded by Bill 23, because now they're concerned that some of the services they rely on are not going to be available anymore because those powers have been stripped from the conservation authorities. It's kind of like one of those careful what you wish for moments, right? Like they kind of overreach themselves, probably not anticipating that, any government would ever do some of the crazier things that they were demanding. But this government's just done them all for them.
I just on that very point, when these announcements about the Greenbelt came out, I think it was the Hamilton Wentworth Home Builders Association, the whichever Home Builders Association for the Hamilton Halton sort of region. And they met that and said, yes, of course, we welcome these changes. But, what we'd also like is to see the height limit on high rises in downtown Hamilton removed. What happened a week later? That limit was removed. It's like literally they had reached the end of their list of asks, and they tacked something else on, and they got that too. And it really was staggering to see. Like you say, there are so many activist groups, industry groups, pressure groups of whatever kind, and the government's job is to listen to those, and you balance the needs, and you move forward according to the demands of the public and of the stakeholders and so forth. And what we have here is just one stakeholder getting everything they want. Over the last 8 years, but particularly over the last since the election. Why do you think? Is it so obvious? Is it as obvious as certainly I've probably suggested on this podcast in previous weeks as a direct line connection between donors to a political party and industries that get what they want. So in such a clear and unambiguous way.
The connection between a lot of the development industry and the current government in terms of political donations has been well documented and fairly clear. All of those donations, that are added up on the Elections Ontario website, etc. All of that stuff is legal for sure.
You're not suggesting otherwise, but yeah.
So that is what it is, and developers and other industries donate to multiple political parties. I think it goes beyond that. I think there's a deep sense within this government that industrial interests, business interests, know best, and that they will advocate for like what's good of society. Unfortunately, that's not true. Businesses are in business to make money, and they're in business to advocate for things that will make them money as quickly as possible to return that money to their shareholders. And that's all fine. That's the way we set up corporations. But that doesn't mean that it's in the long-term interests of society to always do exactly what they all want, especially around these issues around planning. We need to look at evidence. We need to look at other societal interests. Like we need clean water, we need clean air, we need to have public transportation systems that service us and allow people to move around effectively. The broader, even economic good of this region is not to be found in catering to businesses that build tract homes on farmland. Like that may be what maximizes their profit, but that doesn't mean that that's what's good even for the rest of the business community in this region. When people are stuck in gridlock, you can't move goods across the region. Everything's polluted. The water supply is no longer clean, and we're massively increasing greenhouse gas emissions. Like there's no economic, social, or environmental future in that view, even if it means short-term profits for the housing industry.
Would it be possible obviously traditionally the opposition parties are there to oppose, that's right in the name, and to hold a government to account. At the moment, both of the second place and third place parties, if you like, are leaderless, and only the Greens have a leader actually in the House. But those parties, I guess, could say pretty clearly that, okay, we're going to return that land immediately to the Greenbelt the moment we form a government, and we give warning to the owners of that land and anybody developing on that land that we're going to that's what we're going to do. And that could act as almost as a kind of damper on the market. Do you think that's something that they should be looking at?
Absolutely. I think that, given how egregious these changes are, is that it's going to be very important that as we head towards the next election, that the opposition parties commit to repairing the damage to the planning system that the various pieces of legislation that have passed over the last month have done, but also any of these lands that have been removed from the Greenbelt to immediately put them back in and rezone them for agriculture and nature protection as they were.
I want to go back to, excuse me, the recent statement of your request for the OPP to investigate what's been going on here. I mean, you've never done this, I think, for any previous government, at least not that I can recall. Would that be correct?
That's true.
Now, this is going to be a bit of a hypothetical, but I'm trying to impress upon our listeners kind of the seriousness of what you're doing and the unprecedented nature of what you and Democracy Watch are doing here. Say the OPP does investigate what happened here, and they do find what we're concerned about, what we're all worried about, did happen. There was some kind of backroom insider deal, an exchange of quid pro quo, one way or the other, over this deal. In your opinion, how serious of a transgression would that be in the history of this province and perhaps even of the country?
Yeah, I'm not a lawyer, and never mind a criminal lawyer. So, nor do I know the history of these kind of issues particularly well, because it's doing this, as you said, is new for us. But I think that if we have a situation where provincial governments, whether those be elected officials or people who are appointed in the government, are giving particular favors to particular developers so that they can make massive amounts of money, and those opportunities are not available to others, or there's public assets that are being transferred for free to individual developers, then people of course should be shocked about that. I mean, it'll be up to the police to determine whether to launch an investigation, and if they lay charges, that'll be because somebody's violated the criminal code. And, I don't know what the trajectory is for elected officials if they're charged under the criminal code for doing such a thing. That's not my area of expertise, but you can imagine, it's pretty shocking to have people in government, that would be charged in such a manner if that's what it comes to. The reason for us doing this is just because it seems to us to be so blatant. What's going on here, and maybe we're missing something, but I don't know how. It seems so obvious to me that there's no way that these kind of investments would be made in these properties without an expectation of them being removed and profits be made.
Do you still trust this government, or did you have any trust with this government?
Well, it's hard. It's hard I've worked with many, many governments over my career, across the country, many governments here in Ontario. I first started doing work in the environmental sector. David Peterson was premier, which I guess ages me a bit, but, just at the end of his term, and, including Mike Harris's government and Stephen Harper's government, which are, both on the right end of the political spectrum. And we got good stuff done with them. We didn't always agree with them, but we doubled the park system in Ontario under Mike Harris. I worked on a campaign with two other organizations, and we doubled the size of the park system. When Stephen Harper was prime minister, we did some great work on banning toxic chemicals and expanding the national park system. So, this is the first government that I've ever worked with where there is just no progress on environmental issues. Everything from climate change to land use planning, and just complete fiction about the stuff that they say they're going to do versus what they actually follow up with. And I think the Greenbelt is just kind of like maybe the worst example of how blatant the lies are. I mean, how much clearer could they be that they were never going to touch the Greenbelt? How many videos have you seen circulating around with the premier saying they would never touch the Greenbelt? And then what do? They get elected, and then right in the middle of the municipal election campaign, they come out with a plan to, touch the Greenbelt pretty heavily. So, I mean, it's hard to have trust for someone who lies to you all the time.
It's almost the constant kind of stream of bad news. And I'm coming at this from a perspective of thinking that the kind of municipal and housing regulatory field was pretty appalling to start with. It was very problematic. And actually, I mean, obviously, the environmental side of it is one side and the most important, undoubtedly. And to be going backwards on environmental issues at a time when time is running out in every single possible way is just distressing to the extreme. But the other side of this, it seems to me, is the kind of contempt and distrust for democracy, and that the decisions of other levels of government, particularly municipal levels, the region of Halton, the city of Hamilton, to basically take decisions that are a result of very long consultations or of far more public consultations and other consultations than actually the province ever took part in, resulting in sort of statements that they weren't going to expand urban boundaries, et cetera, and just to throw that all in the garbage can seems to speak to me to something else. With regard to kind of this government's view of democracy. And I just wondered if you have any thoughts on that, on the kind of the precedent that this kind of action sets.
Yeah, I mean, you see it in multiple areas, but on the environmental side, which I know most about, we've seen, contempt for due process, for the results of consultations with the public, with the results of decisions made by municipal authorities in the area of the environment, again and again. They've been found guilty in court of violating the Environmental Bill of Rights, not providing opportunities for public consultation when they're making major environmental changes. We see very short timelines for consultation, with bills passed before the consultation period even closes. You name it. And, you highlighted what happened in Hamilton and Halton, where, their official plans, which they spent years developing, were just wiped away with no rationale for why those plans were thrown away. So, there really is no sense that the decisions that the public participates in, or where other levels of government are trying to do something that's proactive and positive from an environmental perspective, should be respected in any way. And of course, with municipal governments, unfortunately for them, is that they are kind of a legislative creature of the province, right? So it's very easy for the provincial government to step in and quash whatever proactive decisions that they're making. I think there is a sense within the development industry that removing the ability of regions and cities to have any say over planning means that they'll just be able to go directly to the province and get done whatever they want. So that tends to be their preferred approach. But you even see the province battling with the federal government, trying to block progressive environmental action. I mean, it's harder for them because the federal government is not something that they can just quash. They have to fight it out in the courts, but they're trying to do that too.
I mean, we're drawing to an end of our time here, but perhaps we could just sort of address in the sort of final seconds. What can our listeners do? I don't think there's any great secret that our audience is probably going to be extremely sympathetic to your kind of perspective by and large. I don't think we have a large audience of developers.
We have tried.
Both
sides.
Yeah. But what can people do? What can people do to kind of get involved with this and to beyond throwing out a couple of tweets or whatever? What can they do to actually kind of try and make a change here?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that we're encouraging people to do. I mean, one is that the pressure on MPPs, continues and will continue into the new year to reverse some of these changes. And then the other is to focus on areas in their community where they can actually make a difference. All of these areas to be removed from the Greenbelt, as I mentioned previously, lack approval for zoning. They lack approval for infrastructure. The upcoming municipal decisions are going to be very important there. In addition, there's going to be a role here for the federal government, in particular for that large area of land I mentioned on the boundary of Rouge National Park. There is a large number of areas of federal interest, ranging from Indigenous rights to the Fisheries Act to the National Parks Act, that are all negatively influenced by this decision. So people really should be connecting with their federal MPs and encouraging action there too. So stay involved, connect with organizations like Environmental Defense. We can focus your attention with 2 community members in your area, community groups that are working on these issues. Stay involved and we'll make a difference.
Well, I think that's a great way to end it. Tim Gray from Environmental Defense, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thanks so much.
That's it for this episode of the 905er. Thank you for listening. As always, you can send us your feedback, thoughts, and concerns or ideas for future episodes to our email, info@905er.ca. We'd love to hear from you. You can help us keep the 905er going by financially supporting us through Patreon as well as PayPal. Visit us at 905er.ca and click on the support tab. As well, links are in the show notes for your convenience. Lastly, you can find us on social media. Search for _905er on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn. So long for now. See you next time.
Looking to make the most out of this life and optimize your personal wellness? Then check out the Natural Man Podcast. Join me, host Mike C., as we explore all areas of human wellness, physical, mental, and emotional. Learn strategies to optimize your own well-being and be in the driver's seat of your own health. Remember, your doctor works for you. Learn biohacks, neurohacks, ways to improve sleep, and ways to optimize your body and your mind. Check us out on Apple, Spotify, the Fountain app, and at naturalmanpodcast.com.